Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on and have a chat with me, be sure to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or you can reach me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at fossil.org. All right, with that out of the way, we've been talking for a half hour, so I was like, we just need to get started and go. And I'm looking forward to it. This person I've been a fan of for a long time, and I'm excited to learn more about her journey in tech and all that great stuff. So my guest today is Tessa Kriesel. Tessa, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Well, of course I do. Hello, excited to be here. I'm actually coming off of COVID that I had over the weekend. Womp womp. So I may have a little less energy than normal, but most of the time I'm full of bubbly energy. I am the developer that you put out to talk to the other developers because I love building relationships and making friends and creating nerd herds, which is my new coined phrase that I heard a few weeks ago and I am stealing it. So I am a nerd herd creator and currently self-employed, but I think we'll dive into all of that stuff. So that's me in a nutshell.
No. I think that there's a lot of things specifically about the career, pivot that you've made recently that I really want to talk about. But like every time I start the show, I want to know how it got started. So when did you realize that technology was the thing for you?
Ooh, okay, so that one's hard. And actually, like I was telling you when we were chatting ahead of time, I listened to the previous episode where you talked about taking VCRs apart, and I can like so relate to
Yep,
that.
yep.
Because as a kid, I took apart VCRs. We got our first computer, and like something was wrong with it. So like I dug through and tried to figure out like software stuff. Then it became hardware stuff, and all around just absolutely loved it. I always had the mentality that like this is my nerd hobby, and I
Sure.
cannot actually work in this space.
Okay.
And then honestly, like going into high school, I um, so like I moved to a small town when I was like in ninth grade, and so I was the new girl at a high school, and so I didn't have like the nerd problems that I think a lot of us like developers had, where it was like finding our tribe
Sure,
and
sure.
getting the attention. I had this sort of like opportunistic scenario where I wasn't necessarily a nerd. In turn, I was the new girl and they were excited to have fresh blood because it was a small town, right? And so I just looked at things differently, right? In terms of like tech and like wanting to feel included. And I felt like tech was like the defining thing of sort of everything of what we did, right? So then, and I'm bringing this around into a loop, I kind of rambled there, but I meant like when, in high school, like you're bringing in different groups together.
Yeah.
I got to hang out with like the people who did tech, but I hung out with like, I was on the student council, right? And so I'm like, hey, let's do this techie stuff with our student council committee, So it was like I did all the things, but I brought my little bit of tech into it. And I saw that as my hobby. So I never wanted to do it. Getting around to it, my dad told me to go into tech. And because he told me to, I therefore was not going to. Um,
Fair
so
enough.
it to honestly decide that it was like a thing I wanted to do.
That's great. I think, one, I think it's awesome that you had some parental figure or some mentor figure to be like, hey, like you like this, you should probably like just kind of give you a little nudge. I think
Yep.
great because, I think the question that I had as you were talking about like you liking to take things apart is that I'd imagine you'd have to have very patient parents, right? Especially like I've told the story 1,000 times, but I'll just do it anyway. Like we got a computer when I was growing up. Day two, I took it apart, didn't know how to put it back together. My dad was not a patient person, was like, fix it now. Like fix it now where I'm going to destroy you, basically. And I figured it out. I got to turn back on. Um, but, it sounds to me like you kind of had, more of a, I wouldn't say like they promoted you to like do these sort of things, but there definitely was like a level of like, oh, Tessa likes to tinker, which I think is a very cool thing to, give that gift to your kid.
Yeah. So my dad actually owns an auto repair shop and he's always been
Oh, that's
into
where it
like
is.
fixing
That's where it is.
cars and racing. So as a kid, he always did racing. And so I got pretty involved in that because it was me and my sister. So I was like the boy he didn't have. So
Mm.
yeah, I agree. I think it was like the car, fixing cars, putting things back together that he felt he could relate to, I think, and then sort of maybe saw that in like me in a different avenue.
Sure. Did you so with that, you mentioned you've listened to previous episodes. We were talking with my guest Jamie Taylor about like cars, and I was asking about cars. Did you ever get into that interest of like I kind of like cars, or is it something that's like, nah,
Oh, yeah.
I want to stick indoors with my tinkering hobbies.
Yeah, no, definitely. Very much got involved in cars. Like I said, my dad raced like my entire life. So I followed him along. He actually sold one of the racing vehicles that he had, and he's like, "Hey, if I sell this, I'll get you a junior dragster." And I was like, "Heck
Oh.
yes," because like I was all about that. So he never ended up actually buying it. So I still give him crap and tell him that he has to buy
Mm.
it for my kids now, but that's a whole nother story. Um, I ended up racing when I was 16 actually, because you
Okay.
could start racing as once you
Yep.
had your license, so I did. I ended up having a boyfriend that also did the same thing, so I drove his truck and would do, like, all the women's races. Today, I don't have anything that we're tinkering on. We're looking at a few different like, I really want, like, a 1970s, like, Chevy truck that I can restore. Also a big fan of Challengers. I had a newer Challenger that I just sold off of my lease a couple years ago, and I have a Harley motorcycle. So I have like things, but I don't necessarily tinker with them. I just for that, I think that's more of like my need for speed, but I do enjoy like the idea of, fixing them and bringing them together. So I'm like knowledgeable on cars, but like only enough to Google stuff, kind of like a self-taught engineer in the first, year or so. At least that's what I
Completely.
feel my skills are at.
Yeah, I mean, completely off topic, but like, did you see that news about the International Harvester? Completely unrelated to anything. So, do you know what the International Harvester is?
Mm.
So, International
No.
Harvester was like, so they're like a manufacturing company, kind of like John Deere, but like they used to do
Yep.
this like thing like in the 50s and 60s, like you bought their tractor and they would give you a car. And basically this car was like the
Crazy.
first like SUV sort of like sort of style,
Hmm.
but they just announced like they got bought by Volkswagen, I think, or Volvo, or one of those European companies, but they're bringing it back, but it's an all electric. So um so I saw
Huh.
that and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, because like when you think of, you know especially like, like the people that drive SUVs, like they tend to not like, I mean, now I guess that might not be as true, but they don't care as much about like the electric vehicle market. So it'll be interesting to see
Sure.
like all these nostalgic people that are like, oh, I remember that my dad having this or whatever, and then there's an electric version, which I think so. It's like the Volkswagen bus coming back, like the all electric Volkswagen bus. I thought that was kind of cool. Um,
Yeah.
anyway,
I do agree, but I have to say, like, and of course, this isn't, you can kind of go back and forth, right? I think both vehicles actually like harvest our resources in our earth, in both ways, right?
yeah,
And so it's kind of arguably on like what ways the actual future. Um, Again, not saying I don't believe it's not electricity, but I do think that there's definitely nostalgia. But I think my nostalgia is still around like the horsepower and like the actual like
yeah,
under the hood kind of stuff, and I don't it's gonna take me a while to be, like, excited about electric, and I can totally say that only just because I am so into cars,
yeah.
that I think that's yeah.
All right,
But
I'm
that's
not
so
sure.
cool. My grandpa was huge into
Yeah,
tractors, and now I
yeah.
have a
So
farm, so I'm,
yeah,
like,
it's
farm
the
tech and
Yeah, so International Harvester was like the manufacturer, and I think it was called the Travelall, is what it was. Um,
mm, I have
anyway,
to check it out.
yeah, completely random though. Like, did you have like you talk about muscle cars a lot, right? And I know this is a tech podcast, and we're
Yeah.
delving into cars. Sorry, folks. Like, did you have like a dream car growing up? Mine, like, I grew up watching Gone in 60 Seconds a lot, so it was like late '60s Shelby Mustang was like the thing, right? The Eleanor car. Um,
Yeah.
like, did you have a car that was
Mine
like yours? Yeah.
I did, and I'm, like, sad about it, and I'm kind of ashamed of it now. 'Cause I could have gone better, but mine was just, like, at that time was, like, the newer Dodge Vipers, so the most
Mm.
recent sort of,
Yeah, yeah.
like I would say, like, 2000s version of the Dodge Viper, and I don't know why or what about that, but man, it was something about a Viper. And then I ended up actually getting, like, one of the new Dodge Challengers, and, oh, sweet lord, I loved that car. Loved that car. So, I don't think it was all bad that I was looking at newer vehicles, but, as I'm older now, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'd love, like, a '60s Challenger, or, like, a '70s Chevy truck," or I've
Yeah.
got different niche demands.
Yeah, we had a like my dad, we for a short amount of time we had a Dodge Dart growing up, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm,
Like, I mean, not like not
yep.
sexy sports car, but like in that similar like,
Yeah.
American made classic sort of car. What was the car that came out around
Yes.
the same time as the Dodge Viper? It was like a roadster, like the wheels were kind of jettisoned out. What was that car called?
Was that Plymouth or something?
I thought it was Dodge.
Was
It
that the
was
Cruiser?
no, the PT Cruiser was a whole different thing. That was like the van
No, it's
thing.
not that.
Uh,
Yeah, no, it's not that one.
oh, the Prowler. That was what it was called.
I don't
The
know.
Plymouth Prowler.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
that's it.
yeah. But like
Okay,
I remember
okay.
because the Viper and that came out, and like there was this whole like, oh, is America is like American car innovation back? Because like at that was at the time where like Toyota had basically taken over the world, right? And Toyota to this day,
Yeah,
right? So, but it was like okay, Dodge and Plymouth and GM, like they're making interesting cars again. Um, and then like this Roadster thing came out, and I remember like somebody in our town had one, and I was like, that is the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But again, not as it wasn't my style, but I it
I
is
feel like Mopar just loves to push the limits. That's like, the Dodge, the Plymouth, the Chrysler, the like, Ram. They're just constantly like horsepower driven. I've like
yeah
definitely gravitated towards them in
yeah.
terms of American made type of vehicles.
Well, they have a demographic, right? Like I think that
Yeah,
people that tend to
people who
buy
want to go fast.
yeah people that buy American cars like it
Yeah.
they want a very specific thing, right? Like I was
Yep.
reading an article about like Ford trucks and like the average like the resale value of Ford trucks or Chevy trucks or whatever is so high because businesses need them, right? Because it's like those pickup trucks are
Yep.
like the best vehicles for like contractor businesses or labor businesses or what have
Totally.
you, right? So like the resale value is really high, and also people hold on to cars forever. Like people
Yep.
like most consumer cars, like you get a car like every 4 or 5 years. It seems like you pay off your
Right.
loan and then you get a new one, right? Like I feel like that's kind of like if you're buying like in that if you're buying like Japanese automaker cars, or even like if you're buying European import cars, like you have them short lived, but trucks like you have them forever.
Yep. Right. Right. And then what's interesting, and we kind of talked about this before we got on here, was like, of course, I like want to get something that's like foreign made or something that's more like, creative and whatever. But
Sure.
being from a small town and coming from like nothing, I just
Yeah.
feel like I don't know, I feel like such a, maybe you can like relate to it, right? But it's like, I feel like it's wasteful, to
Oh,
spend
sure.
money on a vehicle
Sure.
that's like that nice. But then a part of me is like, I don't know. I'm eventually inching my way to like, what does a Land Rover look like? What,
Yeah, but that's like going
currently I'm still
from
in that domestic.
yeah, but that's like kind of going for taste, right? Like, I mean,
That's
I'm
valid.
not a
That's
huge
valid.
Land Rover person, right? But there's definitely an aesthetic that Land Rover has done. Like my wife's uncle, who is like the same like our age, like um one of those weird uncles that's like the same age as you, sort of thing. Um,
Yep.
but like he like does like overland stuff. So he's out there like in the
Yep.
in the
That's what I
mountains,
would be
like
too.
doing Land Rover stuff and like taking
Off-roading and
pictures like with all
yeah.
these like really old Land Rovers. It's cool. It's not for me, but I'll look
Yep.
at it and I think it's cool. Um, but
Yep.
I think what's your point about like not wanting to spend frivolously on things. Like I admit this. Like I'm horrible with money. I grew up without it, so like I spend it very irrationally, except for a couple of things. Like
I tend
I
sometimes
have a
to.
car that's like 8 years old, and I have like I'm like, oh, maybe I should get a new car, and I'll like do a little bit of research, and I'll be like, no. And my wife is like, why don't you get a new car? Like, you've earned it, whatever. And I'm like, I mean, I don't drive enough, and like it does what I
Yep.
need it to do. Like, and nobody likes driving that car except for me. My kids hate it because it's an Impreza, so it's loud. It's a small, loud car, and it's not as
Yep.
comfortable as my wife's nicer like SUV sort of thing. But I'm like, I have no reason to
No
buy
one's
it.
stealing it then.
I have no reason to buy a new. I have no reason to buy one. There's zero motivation other than like you're saying, like frivolous spending, which in if this was like guitars or tech stuff, like I would have just bought it. I would have already bought it already. But for whatever reason, like
I can relate to
yeah,
that.
but for whatever reason, like I don't know. Anyway, so all
I
right,
think that just becomes a stage of life because, like, I feel like I'm in that stage too, and I love cars. Like, I
yeah,
love, love, love cars. But I'm like, I don't drive. Like, I don't leave my house,
yeah,
and so it's me to go to the airport in Austin, which is an hour and a half or 2 hours, or Dallas, and that's it. And I'm like, I can just drive whatever at that point. So it's just
yeah,
my motorcycle, really. That's not a fun car. But
yeah.
moving
No,
on,
that's fun.
cars.
That's fun. That's a car. I mean, we can easily transition from cars to tech because 99% of like car function is technology now. But anyway, um, so
So true.
when did you realize that there was money like that? Like, so obviously you grew up being a tinkerer. You love that. You love like computer club and stuff like that. When did you realize there was
Yep.
money? Like you could have a prosperous like financial career in tech. When did you realize that? Especially coming from a small town, like nobody probably
Um,
told you like directly, "Oh, computers, you can make good money with computers."
yeah, no, no one told me anything, honestly. And I
Sure.
dropped out of college like 3 times and just had, and each time, like, that's not what I went for. I went for criminal justice, I went for business management, and then the 3rd time I did start going for computer programming, but, like, I was already getting jobs at that point, so I'm like, "Wait a
Yeah.
minute, why?" And so I ended up dropping out because just fundamentally it didn't make sense,
Sure.
and I have ADHD, so sitting in
Yep.
lectures are
Yep.
just my version of
Hard.
hell.
Hard. Yeah.
Um, yeah, very hard, right? If it's like now where you can do it remote and you can sort of break things up, totally different, but sitting in a lecture, that's not happening for Tessa. So honestly, it took me a while. And I think so what happened was like I ended up teaching myself how to code when I had my first kid, which like I was from a small town. So I got married and I had kids pretty young. We got married when I was 21. We had our first kid when I was 23. I was in restaurant management at the time, doing hospitality management, getting home at 1 a.m. And I'm like, no, this is not a job I want to keep doing, having a child. And so when I was on maternity leave and just kind of like taking time off, I had sort of been teaching myself how to code, just kind of playing around and like, what can I learn? How can I, whatever. I didn't really think of it as like being a potentially big career.
Hmm.
But like back then, you could get like side gigs on Craigslist. And turns out I
Sure.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, hey, cool. Actually, I can build a couple things for people. So I just started doing couple side projects, right? It wasn't spammy then. Then all of a sudden it was like my dad was like, "Hey, I have a small town business. Like my daughter's doing websites." And then it was like, "Oh, I'm doing a handful of websites." Before you know it, like I just happened to be really skilled at Joomla. I don't know if you remember
I
Joomla, but
do.
I got really good
I
at
do. I do.
Joomla, just haphazardly. And then ended up getting a recruiter who was like, "Hey, we really need someone." And like then I got like an actual job at a product company and like made a decent amount of money in comparison. It was like 40K, obviously in
I
comparison
mean,
to now.
that's
But
that's
then
a lot of
that was
money
a
still.
decent
Yeah.
amount of money for a first tech job.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For a first tech job in a small town because I was still living in my small town and just driving like 30 minutes to go to their offices. So, yeah, I mean, I thought it was like a sweet deal. So it definitely took like an incline of me being like, let me create the skills. Oh, hey, I have actual skills. This is cool. Let me see if I can get paid for them. And then realizing like, oh yeah, no, people want to pay me for these skills. And then that coming to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you talked about Craigslist, right? Like, I feel like, I think you and I are of a similar vintage, right? So, like, there was a point in time
Probably.
where Craigslist was like cool. Like, you could do all sorts of cool stuff on
Hmm.
Craigslist. Like, you,
Probably when we were like young adults.
yeah, like you could find jobs, you could like buy stuff. Like, it wasn't
Yep.
full of scammers and it wasn't full of just like weird stuff. Like, Craigslist was, and then obviously,
Yep.
like all good things, like the internet ruined it. Um, so
So true.
but yeah, like I remember I used to fix computer. Like one of my jobs in college, I worked at Geek Squad, but I also used to like fix computers on the side where I would like go to people's house and fix computers. Um,
Yep.
and like that, it was just so it was so fun, like getting to like meet people and figure out like and most of my the people that I worked with, like they weren't very good with computers. Like I had to do a little bit of teaching and a little bit of fixing and like that. I think that's kind of where it kickstart like the my wanting to educate people kind of like became like a thing.
Yep.
Because I think about this a lot where it's like, especially like you and I, like we're in a similar space, like in this developer experience, content creators, speakers, whatever, right? Like a large amount of our
Yep.
job is the education factor, right? I think,
Absolutely.
I think Scott Hanselman like coined the term like infotainment or edutainment, right? Where it's like educational and
Oh yeah.
entertaining at the same time, right? And I was thinking the other day about, okay, when did I first like actually start like enjoying like teaching people things? And it must have been
Oh yeah.
like it's probably always been around like wanting to like teach people things, but it really boiled down to like having to teach like, people that know anything about computers, like basically how to like not get viruses on their computer and stuff like that, because that's a skill unto itself, especially like
That's
you know, late
bullshitty.
late aughts, right? Like, you know, before like very very good antivirus software and all of that. Um, but anyway,
I feel like I was doing a bunch of that stuff too, like probably in like early adulthood of like I've got viruses on my computer. I'm like, Oh, you clicked something you shouldn't have, but it was
Yeah.
easy to get rid of it, you know? It was, like, just little bits of files that, like, you could track down and sort of see where they didn't obviously, like, resemble the rest of, like, the operating system,
Yeah.
and yeah. Now it's a whole 'nother ballgame.
Oh, I had a good friend in college who is now, it's safe to say, like I mean, in his area, he's a very well known person. Like he's he's like I went to college with him and I was friends with him, but I like had to fix his computer all the time, and he would literally just send me a message. He's like, I probably like clicked the wrong link. I need help. And it's funny because I don't
Aw.
talk to him very much anymore, but like I follow him on Twitter and I see him on TV, and I'm just like, I remember when you would send me texts like because you couldn't finish your paper because your computer wouldn't start and shit like that. And it's just funny because like, it's one of those things. Um but
Yep,
like okay, so you got your first job at like building something or like in the product space. Like when did
yep,
you know what first like what did I'm let me just reel it back because I have a couple of questions. Um, so you mentioned that
no
you
problem.
like you kind of dropped out 3 times. I think of college. I think that's impressive. Like the perseverance there. So like I think that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. I don't know if you're proud or ashamed. I think it doesn't really matter. But like the fact that you did
I
something
just own my
three,
truth either way.
yeah, no, for sure. But I think like as somebody who probably was at college longer than they should have been, like I respect like I respect the
That's
like
valid.
oh like I went back because of whatever. But you like
Yep,
these different disciplines you were interested in. Do you recall like when you first started out, quote unquote, like a real job in tech, right? When
yep.
like skills that you had learned in other disciplines that directly correlated to the work that you were doing at this tech job.
Yeah, definitely. I think first career path was criminal justice,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason I left was because of the level of documentation, which we can kinda
Ooh,
laugh at
that's
now,
funny. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because now we're in thankfully, it's not my responsibility to, like, write all the docs and figure out all the
yeah,
missing pieces,
yeah,
right? But I don't there's also something beautiful of that too, and I think that what really shifted from there was, like, just sort of the dynamics and the like, I think you can relate, right? ADHD people, I didn't know I had ADHD at the time, but now I can self-reflect and see, like, the level of uniqueness and creativity that I need in everything that I do,
mm-hmm.
and at that time, it was just so black and white. You go here, you do this thing, these are the laws, this is the
Yeah,
result, this is crystal clear. In retrospect, you know when you win or lose or when you're right or wrong,
sure,
and I do really
yeah,
like that, right? Results are clear, but also really freaking boring.
mm,
So the documentation and details, I carried that. And then actual business management is because I was already in the hospitality management space. Like I'm just a natural leader, and that's something I've been able to sort of like be able to say with confidence and
mm-hmm.
not feel like I'm bragging. And it's just something that I was gifted with, right?
Yeah,
And so I've always been pulled into, even when I was like 16, it was like, hey, can you be the shift manager? Or
sure,
even like, coming into early careers, like, can you lead the team, right? And so I think that going into business management was when I was sort of in that restaurant management space, a grown career, right? And in that, it was like customer service. If anyone
mm,
has ever worked
yeah,
in customer service
mm-hmm.
and then have to do a technical support job, it is literally the like foundation of what you need
Yep,
because you are going to get someone chewing you out for something you had zero control over and have to be like, I am so sorry that
yeah,
that is your experience and just apologize and move forward, right? And so in both of those, taking kind of both of those, also problem solving, I think alongside of sort of that documentation very much leads into sort of technical careers. But I think that the reasons I gravitated to those different careers was due to some of my natural skills and things I enjoyed, which are all super valuable in tech. And so they were just basically like me trying to date someone that was wrong for me when I didn't want to get like give in and
yeah,
say that tech was who I
yeah.
was supposed to be dating, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally relate. First off, I want to commend you on the fact that you can be so, what's the best way to phrase this? You can be so positive about your makeup because I think a lot of people in our space, like they have a hard time, bragging's not the right word, but they have a hard time
Yeah.
calling out what they're good at. Right. I think a lot of us, I'm very
I
guilty of this
agree with
too,
that.
where it's like you focus so much on like what you're not good at, but the things you are good
Yeah.
at, like nobody knows unless they work with you a lot. So I commend you for being able to like eloquently say, like, I'm good at this,
It's
I'm good
actually
at
true.
that, right? I think that's a great skill to have in and of itself. You mentioned the customer service thing, which is funny to me because I had a boss a long time said, I can teach you anything you want about computers, but I can't teach you how to talk to people.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
And at that point in time I realized like, oh, yeah, you either have it or you don't, right? And I think that
Yep.
there's definitely
Or you
something.
practice really hard to get it.
Yeah, it's like somebody asked me about Toastmasters the other day, and I'm like, Toastmasters isn't gonna fix it if you don't like it, right?
That's valid. That's
Toastmasters just
valid.
gives you the skills, like, but if you don't enjoy it, you're never going to enjoy it unless something happens at some point that all of a sudden you have some epiphany where you're like, oh, I enjoy this. So, I mean,
Yeah. I mean, skills make you more comfortable, right? There's the open opportunity that you may disenjoy it because the skills aren't there, but the confidence of like, this is something I love to do probably isn't going to be there.
yeah.
I get where you're going with that.
Yeah, I had a question too. Like you mentioned, like the ADHD thing, and as somebody who like the
Mhm.
entire house has it, like, and we're all medicated, right? And I was talking to my 9-year-old about like, I understand that our brains want to be like on fire at all times. Like like the
Yep.
constant feeling of being bored unless you're overly stimulated is it is a uh it is basically something that comes with what we have, right? And
Yep.
the medication sometimes it helps, but also like we need to be able to be patient and direct our energy into something that we can actually like positively work on. Um, so my
Yep.
question for you is somebody that has some neurodiversity, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you get over the fact that your brain always does need to be on fire? Is it you just have 1,000 side hobbies? Is it you're just able to kind of rationalize with like, yeah, I know that's ADHD talking. I need to move on. How do you handle that?
Oh man, I have so many things. Okay. So first thing, I think that ADHD is a superpower
Sure.
if you can have proper coping methods and techniques and all the
Mm-hmm.
things in
Mm-hmm.
place, whether being medicated, if that's your thing, whether having coping methods, etc. Because I do think that and my husband and I literally joked about it this morning, coming back to cars, is that we joked that a good analogy for me is like I'm like an F-150, like times like 2, right? I'm like
Sure.
16
Sure.
cylinders
Yeah.
instead of 8, and it's just going so fast. But when you do that to a vehicle, right? Sports cars have more cylinders because then they have more horsepower. When you do that, they have far less fuel economy. And so essentially, we really should be thinking about us ourselves in that way, right? If we are go, 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 go at that level of like cylinders or horsepower, then like we probably should be refueling,
Mm-hmm.
re-energizing, etc.
Or you'll burn out.
And so I'm just sharing that now. Exactly. I literally had this epiphany today, and when my husband said that, I was like, "Whoa, that's so accurate." So I love being a sports car, but I think I also need to like rest. And so there are coping methods. Now I've had that revelation, so it's kind of a beautiful revelation, literally, like I said, just today. But I have coping methods. So I leverage the Ivy Lee method. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Yeah.
the Ivy Lee method. 6 things you get done in a day. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, it is an order by priority. Every time you get pulled away from that list and you're distracted or doing something else, you get pulled back to that list. I am not the best at sticking to it in my current stage of my business, but only because things are changing so much. And it's hard for me to automate and create that list. So, like any developer, I need automation and process and workflow because I want all the things where it needs to be without me touching it.
Yeah,
So long story short,
I have a
that.
list
Go ahead.
with little check boxes, right? Like, and
Yes,
so
yes,
like
right.
literally every day I look at it, it's like, did I do this today? Oh, I didn't. Oh, well, I need
Yep,
to definitely do it tomorrow. Like, it's like, and it's the visual thing. Like, I mean, it's
yep,
a little bit of a nag, but like it helps me remember because I don't know if you get this, but
yep.
like I don't remember what it's called, but people with ADHD, if they don't see it, they'll forget about it, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Whenever
yeah, good.
totally. I was just gonna say, when I read a book, I listen to it on Audible and then I highlight the stuff that I need
Mm,
to retain. And so I
interesting.
visually read the book with my eyes, but I listen with my ears. And I think that the double method is like helps me consume it faster. Also, I can get through a book like way faster because I can consume stuff on 2 times speed at plus, right? And I assume your brain can as well. And then the highlighting is sort of the third trigger of like,
Yeah,
whoa, I really want
yeah.
that to stick. And so I found that to be really effective. But I do think that the list matters, and I think that's actually, why sometimes it really is super important. And on top of it, like just for tips if anyone wants to implement it, because ADHD is a struggle, is I try to make all of my tasks only an hour long because then I
Mm.
can get 6 things done in a day. Otherwise, if you've got a list and you're like, "Let me put 6 things on it," but each of those 6 things is like a 4-hour task, well,
Yeah.
that's a freaking nightmare for ADHD people.
Yeah.
Like, it has to feel accomplishable, it has to feel approachable, it has to feel defined, it has to feel, like, executable. And then I learned that I'm also there's this thing called an M code, which talks about your motivation, strongly recommended, especially for people who have neurodiversities. It actually speaks to what you're motivated by, and I figured out I'm motivated by achievement, so I need to get stuff done. So shifting to an hour all my tasks being only an hour long means that I get to check stuff off multiple times a day, which means I feel
Yeah.
like I'm achieving more. And so I've basically like, I don't know, like hardwired my body. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
like
No,
in a car, right? We've like patched it together to get this thing
sure.
going by these sort of coping methods.
Yeah, like I'm motivated by like my wife and I use the phrase cookies. Like I'm motivated by basically being told that I did a good job. Like I need a pat on the head and you're a good
Ah, you might be
boy.
a cheater too.
Yeah, right. So like it's one of those things where, you know, and whenever my wife and I are having a quote unquote discussion, we were talking about discussions a bit earlier before we got started.
Yeah.
You know, I one, I'm very like I need facts. Like I need examples of like, hey, what did I do? How can I do better? What can I whatever, right? But also like when I'm doing a
Yep.
good thing, like I need the ego stroked a bit. And I can
Yep.
imagine for people that their brain aren't wired like that. It's like, oh, I'm constantly like giving you like pep talks or like whatever, and I'm like, because the alternative is like I'm just floating through space, being like, am I doing a good job? Nobody's told me I've done a good job lately. Like that's not a good place to be, especially for me. Um, and it helps like just
Yep.
calling out the thing that you need because I think a lot of us don't do that either.
Yep, I fully agree. That's where I think, like, I would recommend checking out the M code for that reason. I bet you that's actually the reason why we want results is we want the praise. So it's actually
Yeah.
fueled more by getting the "that boy" or like "good job"
Hmm.
type of scenario. I think wherever that stems from, who knows, but that's definitely my motivation is that praise. So, yeah.
Yeah. So how has we talked a little bit about like this neurodivergence, right? How does it affect your career? Like I can specifically like give you an example. Like I'll be the first one to say this. I get very bored at work, right? Like especially like if
I can.
we were talking about tasks, right? Like you were saying some tasks are an hour, some
Yep.
tasks are 4 hours. Some tasks, like if they're part of some more like broad like goal, they could be days. And
Oh,
like
totally.
and I have a hard time, I lack a ton of
Which kills us.
motivation to like knowing
Yep.
that like okay, I'm day 1 of 4 or day 2 of 4,
Yep.
right? Like
Totally.
so how has knowing this about how you work and what makes you successful, like how has it kind of shaped career decisions, leaving companies, joining companies, what have you, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a super good question because I think it's really been more of an epiphany since I got laid off. So I think
Mm,
I've just been
sure.
stumbling and been blind the whole time. But I will say that, like, most recently being able to like clearly define things in how I operate, right? And so, like, I'm having my own business. And so I'm structuring things in a very structured way. And so I know that I can implement this. I would say, though, in previous roles, like, there was a role that I left and I felt like I just never understood why I left. I was like, everything was great. It was a gravy job. Like I was getting work done, constantly getting praise, lots of deliverables getting done. It's just a machine, right?
Yeah.
Well received, great people, great friends, amazing like office space, just amazing. Great area of town, really truly nothing wrong. Outside of like I was bored. I was
Yeah.
bored out of my mind
Mhm.
as a corporate job at like General Mills, right? And so just big, like, I got to do open source projects, amazing work, right? But I was bored
Sure.
because the work was so straightforward, very monotonous and slow. So I would get what I felt was like 4 hours of work in a day, and they're like, "Here's your 8-hour day." And so then they're like, "Oh, just spend time around like HQ." And literally 4 hours to just go hang out in the gym,
Yeah.
go get a
No, that
massage,
doesn't
get my
work.
hair done, go eat food. Right? Like
No.
I had everything for a person who just wanted to chill, but that
Yeah.
does not work when you have neurodiversity. So for someone else, whoa, why did I leave a job like that? But for me, I was like, that was my hell. I was so freaking bored and,
Yeah.
like, I just could not sit and do it. So, you already get it.
Yeah, no, it's funny. My wife also has ADHD, and like I'll do like like most moms, she works her tail off. Like she has she works at a school, and then she has to raise 2 kids and an adult kid, right? She's got like so she does all these things. So I'll tell her like
I love you can admit to that.
I mean, I that's a whole different thing. Like when people like she used to be like a stay-at-home mom, and people used to say, "Oh, like your mom or your wife, she just stays at home." And I'm like, "No, she works way hard. She works like 80-hour weeks, not 100-hour weeks." Like I would trade that job in a
Dude,
second if I could do
it's
it.
no joke.
To the extent
Yep,
like we had this joke where my wife's always had issues with like financial contribution. Like she always
that's
had a
hard.
hard time being like, "Oh, I don't contribute enough," and I'm like, do you like I don't mean this in like any way other than like would it feel more comfortable if like I gave you a salary? Like because the job that you're doing, it's not small, and like it
Yep,
allows me to be able to do this stupid tech thing and make money, right?
yep. My
So
husband stays home with the kids right now, and
yeah.
he feels the same way, and he's just getting his business off the ground. And, like, it's totally about money, like, there's just a value to it. It's a black and white exchange that makes it clear that you're contributing, but I'm like, "Holy crap, man, if I paid you what you're working, right? A
Yeah.
chef, a maid,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
nanny,
Yeah. Yeah.
a yards keeper, like, all the things."
Yeah. No. I I had something to say. Oh, so because of that, like I'll tend to like every now and then I'll be like, why don't you go and get a massage? Or like go and get a pedicure or a manicure, or like go to a spa, or like go and do something to like decompress. And she's like, I can't. That sounds so boring. Like I don't have like I my like
It
a-
is super
and
boring.
I feel bad because like she's basically saying like being like relaxing is not comfortable. And like
I mean, it's kinda true for me too.
yeah. Yeah. No, like I mean, not to say that like I don't want people to take this conversation and be like, "Oh man, like having ADHD sucks." Like no, I think like Tessa said it perfectly for people that are listening to this, right? Like it's a superpower, but you need to be like 100% aware of where you are good and where you are not good at things. Otherwise, like you're
Yep,
just you're kind of a mess. And I mean that in the nicest way possible, right? And I think you see that a lot with people
yep,
that haven't quite figured out like how to manage their neurodivergency is they tend to just come off as a bit messy. And,
yep,
that person probably has a ton of amazing qualities, but outwardly they just like, oh, this like running over, being all crazy, like not really being able to stick things. People use the word flaky a lot. Like I've heard like
yep.
people with ADHD be described as flaky, and I'm like, I mean, what if your brain was being pulled in like 10 different directions? Like you'd drop a lot of balls too if you didn't know how to manage everything.
Yep. I mean, and even when you do have coping methods, there's just no way to
Yeah.
change how our brains are wired,
Yeah.
right? Like we will drop balls and that's like inevitably possible or inevitably going to
Yeah.
happen, right? But I think it's like having all the different backups, right? So like we talked about how my note taker joined my meeting and you were like, "Oh, whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, I have to have that note
Mhm.
taker because
Yeah.
it takes all of my notes, it takes all of the tasks out of there. Those tasks automatically go into my CRM. I go in there, groom my tasks because otherwise I would never get everything done that I committed to my clients if it wasn't in something that was like automatically being sort of
Yeah.
self-organized and put in front of me to get done. And so it is a superpower in that I can get so much done in a day. I can do a week's worth of work in 8 hours. Like if I am
Yeah.
unhinged, everything is perfectly defined, but if something's not defined, I think that's where we just fall into this pitfall. And I think that's what I see in DevRel, right? To kind of like take it back to sort of our industry is like DevRel, unless you've literally sat down and perfectly defined it. And whenever I talk to people about strategy, they're like, oh, we don't have time for strategy. I was like, oh, so you're just running around with a bunch of chaos then.
Yeah.
Because that's all it is until you have a strategy where you're like, you do this, we're on this, here's our plan, here's where we're going. And all those little tasks are there ready to be done. At least that's sort of like my rant on it. And
No,
I think
no.
to add to what you shared, I do think, just to add this quick, I think that when you are messy, right? And it's not at your fault, it's
Mhm.
your neurodiversity. But when you're messy, it can be really easy to hit a place of like darkness or sadness or depression or severe anxiety because everything feels like chaos to you. And I think that that can be sort of the part where people are like, ADHD is horrible, this is bad. And it's like, yes, it can be, but like self-awareness and research and discovery, I think is like so, so, so important.
No, look, I appreciate everything you just said. I think that there's like we can have an hour long, 2 hour, year long conversation about all of this. I do. Uh,
So true.
yeah, I want to, I want to do justice by the work that you're doing, and I want to talk a little bit about how you're able to kind of like the AI thing is an interesting thing to me. As somebody who I work
Yeah.
in the AI space tangentially, I guess, not a ton, like, but like the idea of like co-pilots and assistants and things like that is like something to work with. And,
Yep.
you know, I have a love-hate relationship with it because like it's about taking away like trivial or like low-hanging fruit tasks and automating them. But then it is like on the onus of us to like do the follow-up. And I'll
Yep.
just say this, as somebody with
Totally.
ADHD, like the first thing that I saw is like let's just take like the meeting example that we're talking about. Like for folks that might not be
Yep.
following what we're talking about, like Tessa has like an AI bot that like is gonna take the transcription of this conversation and then create notes and put it into a system for that she can review later or whatever, right? She does this probably with clients and other all sorts of conversations she has, right? But it's on
Yep.
Tessa to like go in there and like do all the pruning of the information. And, when these sort of things first started coming out and being more and more like in your face, my first response is, okay, so nobody's going to read those. People are going to go to meetings, not pay attention, saying like, oh, the AI will just summarize it for me. And then they don't read the summarization. And then they forget they have a follow up, or the next meeting they're like, oh, okay. And really they weren't paying attention and they didn't do their job. So like that's the one like
Yep.
because I'll be honest, like sometimes that's how my brain works. I've been my gift is that I tend to remember things that probably I shouldn't remember. I know eventually that's probably going to go
I love
away
that.
and I'm screwed because I've never been a very good note taker. But until then, I'm
Sure.
just kind of like navigating this world where I can remember things pretty quickly, or you know, like oh, I need to do this, and I just kind of hold myself accountable a bit more, right? So
Yep.
I wanted to get your thoughts on. You said like that you can take a week's worth of work and put it into an hour. Um, I'd be curious to know like what are some other things, and I want to get into like your business and all of that afterwards. But like, what are some of the other things that you've done to kind of augment the fact that like you are, somebody who's navigating this world, trying to do as much as you can, and know that scale is a thing. How What are some other tricks that you figured
Yeah.
out to like scale yourself?
Yeah. Actually, I can tell you like an exact example that I did
Sure.
today.
Cool.
So yeah, so like, and this is sort of an example that I'll walk through it and then we can kind of dive into different tools and different things that could be done this way. But so coming back around to the note taker, right? So I had a consult call with a client today. We'll get into my business in a little bit, but I essentially help developer tools go to market. This client is actually a little bit off of my normal niche, but still from an audience I know well, open source audience, honestly.
Mhm.
Perfect little
Sure.
plug there.
Sure.
And so I was chatting, yeah, and so I was chatting with him about his business and what he was doing. And it was really great because like I suck at taking notes, but I'm great at conversations. If I can be in
Yeah.
the moment, have a conversation, I can ask the right questions, be a great listener, probe all the things, right? And so when I don't have to take notes, that's liberating for me. And so the note taker is just absolutely perfect because that's exactly what I need is that I need to be in the moment because I know that good stuff's going to come out of it, but I need to be on and doing that. And so we start going through the conversation and, shared some frustrations and what have you. And I was like, okay, let's like dive into that. And essentially, like, we're maybe 10 minutes into a consult call. And I'm like, okay, I know exactly where this is going to go, right? I could sort of predict what this client might be dealing with, the next steps he might have to take. And I was able to actually like shift him into what is the first version of a call that I would have with a client after a consult call. So essentially, once they book with me, we get into what I call like a vision and market discovery type of a call, right? And so instead, I'm like, let's just do it now because I knew that if we could do it in the call, he could potentially get to the end of our consult call and actually feel like he had some sort of next steps. And when people have next steps, right, they're always willing to be like, I need more of your time. I need to pay you. And I just like, I know this person and I knew of him and wanted to sort of help him, right? So instead of having to take notes and think about things, I was like in the moment. And so we were just going boom, 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 boom. I was asking him to explain his product, what his use case is, who his best customers are, the things that he thinks that can do. And then, we started working into like, hey, I could be one of your customers based on what you told me.
Yeah.
Here's kind of my scenario. How do I fall into that use case? Like, what would you build for me? Because this person was looking to start to define, like, okay, I've got this great product. I already have a service company, but their service company isn't doing services related to his product. So he's in like two different scopes. And so trying to take his service company to be related to his product is essentially what we were taking down that path, right? And so we started talking about that, and I'm like, okay, how would you pitch me? And he was able to just explain to me sort of on the fly, based on the like mojo and
Hmm.
vision and
Hmm.
like passion for building his product, that he was like, I do this and I do that. And then we talk about this and we could do that. And then we could look at this. Right. So then I spent an hour with someone, have this transcription, and now I actually can go around. And he did end up signing up for my accelerator, which we can dive into what
Yeah.
that means. But I have two sort of service offerings. One of them is an accelerator, and it's really like this sort of program that we dive into that at the end of it, they get a go to market playbook and roadmap. And so,
Mm.
what we talked about with DevRel, right? Oftentimes, there's no strategy, there's no vision.
Sure. Yeah.
What's the use case that this is actually solving, right? What business critical pain point does this tool solve? Not some tertiary pain point, because developers don't want stuff that solves a pain point that's seventh on their list. They want the thorn that's in their side solved
Yes.
now. They can't build it, they need to buy it, and that is the use case that we go after. So my accelerator basically goes and walks through that. So long story short, because of circle back, my note taker took all those notes. I brought that into a prompt that I have written, an AI prompt. I've had to get better at AI engineer prompting, um, and actually bring that in and be like, hey, this is our conversation. There is actually three nuggets to pull from this, because we also talked about my future product and how it would play into his product.
Mm.
And so then I had AI be like, here's the transcription that Circle Back collected for me that took findings. I ran that through a different bot that I have trained on my services and how I operate and things I care about. All things Tessa writing, past strategies, past frameworks, past maps, everything I've ever sort of built, right? And then reference it back to that of like, what can we do for this person? And I had like all these different
Sure.
documents and
Yeah.
deliverables that I would normally create in the accelerator through time, research, customer feedback, et cetera, that at least were like start states. So now when I go into this accelerator, instead of us spending 2 hours on trying to ideate market opportunities and different views and different visions, like now I can be like, hey, from this conversation, I was able to dive through, AI was able to dive through and
Yeah.
pull all these different opportunities out. And then I spend my time in these developer communities and channels actually researching. Does that make sense? Does that align to the audience? And then I customize everything to my actual playbook. But because I used AI, right? It's the note taker. It's automatically creating my tasks that goes into my CRM. That's automatically capturing sort of the prompts and deliverables. I'm trying to like pre-explain what I do, but
Sure. Sure.
sort of the prompts and deliverables that go into like my project management system. And then let me think of the one other. Shoot, I have one other tool that I use and I can't remember what it is. Oh, I use Claude, and Claude
Yeah.
recently just rolled out a. Did you see that? The being
Yeah, I
able
did.
to navigate a computer.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah, I saw
thing that
that.
I want to build next, and you're totally going to love this, is I want to use that to go out and do a V0 of developer experience audit. If I prompt
Mm.
it and say, hey, here's the use case that this tool is supposed to solve, here's the target audience, here's the problems that they have, here's the pain points they have. Does this actually articulate those pain points? And like I think it could do a better job than a human can, because I have emotions and opinions, right? And I'm like, oh, I don't like that color. And then sometimes I get in the moment about not liking the color, and it's like, do I really hate the messaging or is it the branding?
Yeah.
But then like going into docs, are the docs thorough enough? Does it cross reference? Does it feel like it's sequential? Because sometimes like I have clients that come in and I'm helping them with their go to market and I don't know what they're doing. One of my clients is like, they can do AI agent like deployment checks, they can do robotic stuff, they can do ML ops on premise deployment verifications. Like they have all these different use cases their tools can provide. How is Tessa ever supposed to be ML ops, robotics, and AI
Yeah.
intelligent? I
Yeah.
am
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
but all these tools and other resources can help me do that. And so honestly, in my day to day, it is like almost I like rely on it to do my research.
Yeah, I feel bad now because we kind of did that. Okay, tell me how Tessa has like helped AI like with her business without talking about Tessa's business. So, like, so
That's okay.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about Built for Devs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got laid off from Snapchat back in February, and I have always wanted to be self-employed. I tried that before Snap, and they recruited me very thoroughly.
Sure.
Loved it, had so much fun there. Sad to no longer be there. Honestly, I was never a Snapchat user, but I am now a Snapchat advocate. Like such a
Yeah.
great company, such a great culture and purpose. Anyways, digressing from my rant about how much I love them. Started a business. It took me a little bit to figure out what I want my services to be. I think at the end of the day, like when we think about DevRel and getting into some sort of a service business, there's so many different directions you can take. And it's like any good, business advice, you have to niche in. You have to figure out what that looks like. You have to have a target audience. You have to understand them, find a flow, find a process. And I sort of like, went through some stages with that. I thought it was going to be sort of middle startup Series B, Series C. They want to bring DevRel in. I can come in, help them get things off the ground, help them hire a team, and then I disappear.
Yeah, sure.
And then I realized there's so much politics with that.
Yeah.
I didn't want
Yeah.
to come into a company that already had opinions, already had a bunch of leaders, already had a bunch of stuff that wasn't working. Some people thought it was working, some people loved it, some people hated it. And I was just like, this is not my nerd herd.
Sure.
So
Yeah, yeah.
I eventually narrowed down into where you can obviously assume I'm getting to, well, realizing that like I want to serve dev tools. I want to serve founders of dev tools because I want to serve my nerd herd peers, right? I can't make a bunch of money from DevRel people. My business coach told me they don't have money to spend on my services or coaching because they don't, right? No one wants to hire me to help them make their program better because it's hard to admit that we might need a coach or that we might
Hmm.
need help or maybe we need expertise outside of it or maybe I'm not as good as they are to begin with, right? And they're better. But diving kind of coming back, right? And so I decided to focus in on dev tools, very early stage, pre-seed, seed, series A. I do have a couple that have kind of trickled in a series B level and have not really chose to opt with them. I've referred them on to people that you've had on your podcast or other agencies that I have relationships with. And so what I do is I come in with dev tools, and because I think the biggest pain point in DevRel is that strategy, not understanding that business critical use case that that tool serves and like the true audience that has the money and is willing to pay for it. It's one thing to be like, hey, I've got a tool, it can do this, it solves these pain points. But if those are like open source devs and they have no money, they're not going to buy your tool, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It has to be very product market fit aligned, right? And so the first part of my services is with DevTool founders. I get to hang out with a bunch of nerds.
Yep.
Sometimes they're not the technical founder, but in most cases they are.
Yeah.
We get into an accelerator. I've done a 1 day accelerator and I've done a 4 week accelerator. And the 1 day accelerators are so much more fun. And
Hmm.
so I think I'm actually only 1 day accelerators. Very intense day. We come together, we do a market fit. We talk to their customers. We talk to their prospects. I bring in a developer advocate. I bring in a DX engineer. I bring in their target audience. There's usually about 4 of us that come in and do the accelerator so that we can actually get real life feedback right on the fly. And so what we do is just like, what does your tool do? What can it do? What pain point should it actually be solved for? And sometimes it's like when they're early stage, they may have built a tool and it's not what they want it to go to market for, but it's something that they can go to market for and gain some revenue. And so we might shift in a different use case than they planned, only to gain revenue, gain adoption, gain growth, right? And then start to pivot later where it's like, let's add the additional features. Or they built a tool that does exactly what they think it should do. They just need help niching into that target audience. We do a developer experience audit. We go through and like take the use case that we defined and we actually like do that audit right there on the fly. The next hour, we will work with their team if they want to improve their developer experience, like right then and there. And it might not be like immediately changing the docs, or maybe it is, or it's just creating sort of the tickets, right? These are the things that need to get fixed. And then from there, we create the playbook. And so it's like, who's the audience you're going after? Where do those developers spend time, i.e., channels? How should we be engaging with them? And that's really more about feedback and discussions and the problem that your tool solves, not, hey, look at me and my shiny tool.
Yeah.
And then we sort of break that down from there and look at demand gen. And then I help the founders pitch and sell. So we make sure that their elevator pitch is like right on and that their pitch deck is polished. Then the second half is DevRel done for you, where it's all just bring people together and we do it for them, which is a monthly. That was a
If I
lot,
could just
but there's a lot
no, no, no,
in
no,
like
no.
the
I'm gonna
accelerator.
I'm just going to like ultra summarize, like you
Click back
provide.
or circle back.
Well, no, like you like. I'll just be completely blunt. You
Yeah.
provide services that founders should not have to focus on,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And
Right.
it's
So like
super painful for them to do.
if you're trying to build a product or a business, do you really want, like, look, let's be real. Like developer experience in tech, like it is very niche, but it is the entire business.
Yeah.
This is why I think it's so interesting, because I have yet to see like a company like successfully nail it the first time, where they build out a team, an org of DevRel people. Like all these people individually are great. They have great opinions. There's just no thought into like, okay, how do we turn this into things that directly generate revenue for our business, right? And
No strategy.
it's much better, in my opinion, to leverage somebody to do that for you. Um,
Right. Yeah.
look, I've been a developer advocate. I can tell you firsthand that just because you're a developer advocate doesn't mean that the people you work for or the company you work for understands developer experience, right? I have firsthand
Right.
knowledge of that.
Yep.
So bringing in somebody that has the background that you do, has done developer advocacy, developer relations at a very well-known company, right?
Yeah.
And has this backlog of, this is how things have, this is how the industry is changing, this is how developers think, this is how you market to developers. Like, completely off topic thing, but I have this thing that I've been doing on TikTok where I talk about tech things in a cold plunge for 5 minutes. I do it a few times a week.
Oh,
um
nice. I have to
yeah.
check that out.
Yeah, so, but like I had a thing about how developers, like, there's this like cliche thing like developers hate marketing. I
Yeah.
disagree with it. I think developers love marketing. Developers love being marketed to so much. Like the mechanism, how you deliver your marketing to a developer has to be very, very specific. Has to be genuine, has to be
Yeah.
authentic. That has to hit their, like you were saying, it has to like fall into the nerd herd. And traditional marketing technically
Yep.
doesn't do that. So when people say like developers don't like marketing, what they really mean when I hear it is developers don't like traditional marketing, like
Yep.
MQLs and attainment and all of the silly marketing buzzwords that we use. But if you look at any tech trend, it got started off by some marketing campaign. Like I'll just do
Yep.
this example because I've been looking at it a lot recently. Cursor, right? Like
Sure.
Cursor was, in my opinion, an excellent developer marketing campaign, because all these developers all of a sudden were like, oh, this Cursor thing is really, really cool. I want to use it. I want to try to get my company
Hmm.
to sign up for it. Do you think that just happened because some random person like posted a video a few months ago saying Cursor's cool, right? Do you think that person just
I
did
was
that
actually
for
going to ask you
like
if you know what it was because I didn't see this stuff.
the origin? Like the origin was like, I don't remember who it was, but like some tech influencer was like, this Cursor thing is really cool, look. And they went from there.
Mm,
If that person was paid or not paid, I don't care. But like
right.
that turned
That's
in,
why I was literally
yeah,
just
yeah,
I was going to say it's so at the end of the day, no, developers don't hate developer marketing if it's done right. But I think the way people like describe marketing is that it is like marketing, right? And
mm-hmm,
so the way I look at it is I call that developer engagement.
yes,
It's all about engagement.
yeah,
Like I'm engaging with you. I created a blog post to engage with you. I created a video to engage with you. So it's marketing, but it's not, right? Because marketers don't create blog posts to engage with their
sure.
customers. They do it to get them to buy something.
So
Where if you're doing it right for
yeah,
devs, it's like you're getting them to engage, you
I,
know?
I want to be mindful of time. Can we talk a little bit more about this? Like, can we have?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. All right. So
yeah,
for folks that are
sure.
tuning in, we're probably going to go longer than an hour. I'm sorry, but I want to get my very opinionated point across, and I want Tessa to rip it apart. Um,
I love it.
I believe I am in the camp. We are all in sales and marketing. That is the camp that I'm in.
Yeah, oh,
Okay. All
absolutely.
right. So
Yep.
that's my definitive ground statement. Some people like very strongly disagree with that, right? Especially
Well, I
like,
have a blog post that's called Devrella Sales.
yes. Yeah, but I am also the
Yeah.
opinion that product is in sales. Engineering is in sales.
PLG, product-led
SRE.
growth.
Yeah, SRE is in sales. Like literally if you are at a company whose job it is to make money, You are in sales.
Yeah.
You're just you're just a different piece in the pipeline. That's my opinion. It is a very strong opinion. You will not convince me otherwise. So that's my ground statement. So with that, when we talk about DevRel or developer experience or whatever you want to call it, I immediately just say, okay, so you're marketing for developers. I know that's not the best way to phrase it, but you are creating some moments, some initiative to excite developers, right?
Yeah.
And like you're talking, the phrase uses developer engagement, which I think is a fair enough thing way to use it. My opinion is if we talk to developers in a very specific way, we can tell them to do anything.
We sure
Like
can.
I'm just gonna say this. Like there
If
was a
they trust you, you could get a they're soldiers if
yeah,
they trust you
there was a
and
point
fight
in
for you.
time where everything was gonna be an NFT,
Yep.
right? And developers tacked onto that, and then the whole industry all of
They
a sudden,
followed the herd.
yeah, all the industry all of a sudden was like, now this NFT thing's not real. Like it's just a grift. And then like that there's still people that are in the NFT space that are trying to make it a thing, or the Web3 space that are trying to make it a thing, whatever, right?
Yep. And there's
But
some parts that are a thing, right?
yes,
But just maybe not that part.
yes. My point being is that if you're able, like, we're all human beings, so
Yep.
we're easily influenced. If things like tickle the right neurons in our brain, we will do it. Like that's just
Yep.
honestly, that's just how society works. So if you're able to
I
figure out
agree.
how to properly message to a developer, it is getting a developer to buy into something is very straightforward. In my opinion, it's
Yep.
easier than getting like a C-level executive to do it, or
I agree.
or like because that your herd analogy or anecdote or whatever you want to phrase it, like it's perfect. We're looking for our people. We're looking
Yep.
for people that we can talk to about the things because our job is so hard, like
Yep.
from an emotional standpoint, because we're constantly like being told to do things we don't want to do. We're constantly running into failure. There's imposter syndrome. If you can tell us that
Yep.
we're
Owners manuals,
yes, owner,
books written.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like if you can say like, hey, like the join us, you will get them to be along for the ride. And that
Yep.
is, in my opinion, like that's all developer marketing should focus on. Is like, how can you get
Yep.
developers in the truck, right?
I agree.
Go ahead.
I can't argue with you because I fully
Okay, cool.
agree.
Okay.
I agree with you so much so that the other part of my business that is like the future part that I'm starting to build is actually I'm like playing with naming it journey and like using
Mm,
different connotations of journey
yeah.
because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is just go alongside these developers, right? We're just like coming
Yeah.
alongside them because exactly what you just said, right? They want their people, they want to hang out with everyone else, and they're actually so much less mysterious than everyone coins them to
Sure.
be.
Sure.
We're actually so ridiculously easy, right? Tell us the exact solution that you have and the pain points that fell into that so that we can relate to you and understand that, like, you get us, you know what you're talking about. If you tell us that one of your friends that we know is someone that you know and there's a level of credibility, I am like hook, line, and sinker, your new best friend.
Yeah.
We're quite simple.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it means coming in and coming alongside,
Yeah.
not directing at. And if you
Yeah.
don't come in and come alongside, then we're basically like, screw you. You're not us. You're not a developer. You're
Yeah.
making that crystal clear in
Yeah.
your engagement. And we want nothing to do with you. And so that's why like actually in my day to day, and I think I told you this beforehand of like I wanted to eventually get to it, is like I literally end my days and I'm like, holy crap, I had so much fun today.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
I have so much fun writing marketing messaging. People can call it marketing, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I have so much fun writing marketing messaging for my peers because I get to go in, feel their pains, think about their day-to-day job, think about what they're trying to deal with and solve, and how do I convert that into something that they can relate to and understand? Because at the end of the day, that's what I want. If I'm vetting a new tool, I want to see that there's three different tools I can compare and contrast and be like, you don't philosophically agree with what I agree. You don't quite have the features I need. Bing, bang, boom, you have it, you know? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to digress on that.
No,
But
it's
yeah,
it's funny because so my job right now is I do contract work at Microsoft, right? And
yeah,
A large part of my job is looking at new tech, whether it's tools or trends or whatever, and basically just kicking the tires on it and seeing is like, oh, is this something developers like are actually going to like build groundswell around? And
That's so cool.
I presented on something the other day, and there's like an exec in the room, and he was very much just like, your job is cool. Like your job is so cool. You just get to play with toys all day long. And I'm like, yeah, it's not bad. It's not a bad gig. Um,
That's what I'm doing.
yeah. So like, I mean, I totally
Multiple toys per day.
exactly right. And I think as we're starting to wrap up, because I do want to be mindful of your time. Like the it's funny that we navigate these areas and then we find something that we're like truly like passionate about, and it's very clear from talking to you that something you're very passionate about, right? And
Yep.
one of the things I would love to kind of get from you is that, when did you realize that this space was like the passion for you? Like we talked a little bit about like why
Mm,
tech was your thing. Like we talked a little bit about the educational part of it, and then how you
yep.
just naturally had like these, I guess, these different like little pockets of skill sets that kind of mapped into what you are now. But like, when did you quite truly realize like I care about what makes developers happy, what developers can do to
Yeah.
like maybe even not like happy, like what can developers do to like become more successful in what they're doing, not
Yep.
like make as much money as possible, but be more successful in the role that they're currently working in, or help them be more successful if they're trying to look for other opportunities, right? Or in your case,
Yep.
like helping businesses be more successful, figuring out how to get developers to do all the things I just talked about.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, giving developers the experience they want, right?
Yes.
So like I get paid by businesses to like help them gain developers and like have adoption. But the way I look at it is like I'm just helping yet another company deliver a good developer experience that we
Yes.
deserve, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so honestly, I don't think that became crystal clear. Like as you were asking that question, I'm like, okay, there's a couple little triggers. Like when I first taught myself how to code and I learned Joomla, I did that because I built a Guitar Hero community. Like we ended up like having
Oh,
tournaments playing
that
Guitar
is awesome.
Hero. It was like total video game. Yeah, it was super fun. Activision like started putting our tournaments like on their blog or on their forum. I became a moderator. They started sending me swag, like just a sweet, cool gig, right? And I think that in that, I felt like it was like, oh, I'm just nerding out with my fellow Guitar Hero people. But I think at the end of the day, what that actually was starting to fuel is like this desire to create the nerd herd. Right. And so whether the nerd herd is my Guitar Hero peers or whether the nerd herd is developers who want to use an AI dev tool and I want to help them have a better experience, or I want to deliver a cool tool to them so that they can solve a pain point in their job. I think it all boiled down to like actually bringing the people together because that is something I love doing. It's like I taught like over 300 women how to code and girl
Oh,
develop
that's
it.
awesome.
That definitely, yeah, it definitely fueled the trigger because I got to help women find different careers and learn more stuff about who they were and shift and evolve and all the beautiful things. And I thought that maybe it was like the teaching, the like mentorship, and I love all that stuff. I love teaching, love education, but I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's about bringing the people together. And so it's been sort of a very much a progression of, you know, just starting to naturally see that, I think. Yeah, it's the humans. I'm an extrovert,
Yeah.
extroverted developer.
I mean, it's funny because there's that cliche that developers aren't very extroverted, right? Like we all just want to sit. Like, and I think you and I were talking about this before we got started. It's like, there's all these preconceived notions of developers, and developers like to think we're all special, but like, now we're all the same. And like,
Yep.
it's so jarringly clear to me that whenever I see somebody that's like trying to act like they're different, I'm like, nah, stop it. Like, like,
That's what
like
did you see
it's
my post today where I was
yes,
like,
yes.
why are we all following the herd? And I'm like, come on, Tessa, what did you expect?
Yeah, it's like it is kind of
Yes.
funny. I understand our want to be unique, and I think we all are unique.
Yep.
Well, our own special little snowflakes. But I mean, if you look at
Yep.
snowflakes, they all look the same until you actually get to
They all make
like
a snow pile.
right, like unless you see it like from a microscope. Yes, they're quite different, but in the grand scheme of things, very very similar. Um,
Yep.
but I want people to like do the things that you enjoy as well. Like I'm not trying to say like just do the things
Yep.
everybody else is doing. Do the things that you enjoy. Um, but like just
Absolutely.
like I think that people like there was that 10x developer trend or whatever. It's like all I see is like a lot of like 1x developers who try too hard, who try too hard to come off
Yeah.
like they're overproductive. Um, anyway, different. That's a different conversation. Um, this has been awesome. I think that one, we talked about this a little bit before we got started, like being able to talk with you about kind of your upbringing in tech and why you've gotten to this point that you are right now. It's very exciting because I think that you're in a space that, in my opinion, like this should be something that like a lot that exists a lot. Like instead of X
Yeah.
company trying to like build their own organization, like consulting with people that have been doing it for a long time until you get that framework, and then you can maybe install your own team. But like trying to do
Yep.
all of the stuff, like that's the silly cliche, like building the plane while it's flying or whatever, like same sort of thing, right?
Yep.
Like all you're gonna do eventually is you're gonna look at a budget sheet and you're like, oh, we spent lots and lots of millions of dollars on people and time, and like what do we
And
have to show
travel
what
and
yeah
expenses.
what do we have to show for it, right?
Yep.
Like I think it's a much better idea to like figuring out how we're going to define success and then doing the installation. And that's where I think, built for devs can definitely help in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially like when it comes to like early stage, which again was like, it was hard for me to pick early stage because they are less funded and I have like, certain revenue goals and things I want to stick to. And obviously, like, you have to think about sort of like your end goal and the revenue you want to make and all of that stuff. But the whole point of that is that they don't have a lot of like runway. And so if they can bring someone in who knows what they're doing, create that strategy, give them that go to market playbook so they understand where am I talking to developers? Where do my developers hang out? Who are my developers? What am I even selling to them in terms of my actual pitch and messaging? It just makes that runway like last so much longer, right? And I think when you start to look at some of those like later stage companies, like absolutely, I don't serve later stage companies for the political reason that we
Sure.
talked about. If a Series C comes in and they're like, Tessa, do a DevRel strategy, I'm like, no, I will not. But here are a bunch of great other people that
Sure, sure.
will.
Yeah.
Um, I think that there are a lot of people who are really out there doing sort of a version of DevRel, and I think that it's hard to bring it in because of what you said. There is so much that goes into what developer relations is as a whole, and I don't think that I think it's a disservice at
Yeah.
people who try to bring the entire function into the company um, in the way that it is. So that's a whole. This is a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation we're getting into,
This
which is
is
why I'm sort of like
Yeah, episode
teasing it and being
yeah,
like,
like
okay,
let's
stepping back.
we should do an episode 2 where we just talk about this, and like, maybe at that point you'll have more insight to glean in this particular topic, because it sounds like you're thinking about like the next iteration of your business, right? And I think maybe it would be a great to kind of chat as that has come to fruition and you have your very strong but loosely held opinions on how these sort of things can really matter for companies. um,
Oh, I have the opinions now.
okay.
It's a whole nother conversation. So
Yeah.
I just think that like DevRel as an industry really needs to get broken down,
Hmm.
in terms of like the fundamental understanding of it. Because at the end of the day, when you think about it, it's marketing, product, it's engineering, it's customer service,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
all the
Hmm.
functions inside of one. And you can't fundamentally ask one person or even one person to come in and know what to do and
Sure.
how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where I'm like, we could talk for so long.
Yeah.
But I am starting to evolve and will definitely be evolving into a product, which I will very much love to have a
Yeah.
conversation with you about because it plays into the whole journey and idea of developer experience. And at the end of the day, we just want the things that we want delivered really quite forwardly in front of us. So why not just cater that experience to what we need?
I plus one to that. This conversation has been great. I've really enjoyed it. I really also appreciate you taking a little bit of extra time to kind of flesh out the conversation and continue it. For folks that are not following Tessa, or maybe you're curious about Built for Devs, there'll be some links in the show notes to some different ways you can get in contact with her. You can also find her on social media. Like one good place is Twitter. That you can find her at Tessa K22. So TESSA. Wait, I'll start again. TESSAK22. And again, there'll be some links to some other places in the show notes. So we've been talking for a little bit over an hour about a bunch of different things, right? And one of the things that I love to do is I love to kind of get my guests' kind of thought process, or the summarization of the feelings they have based on this conversation. So my question to
Yeah.
you is, as we wrap
Smart.
up, when we think about, we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, what are some of the things that, we've talked about your career, we've talked about what you find interesting, we find about this whole space that you're looking to, I hate to use this term, disrupt. Um, but, but I'd love to kind of, if you had a word or two to summarize the feeling that you get, or uh, how you, or in general, like a summarization of how this conversation felt for you. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think one term would be like passion,
Mm-hmm.
and like in a like developer sense, because it's every single time that I get to hang out with a fellow developer, all coming back to the nerd herd analogy, and
Yep.
we just want to hang out with our peers. I just feel so relatable and I feel so seen again because I do so much marketing stuff in
Yeah.
my business and feel like DevRel has been a lot of executive leadership for me, a lot of marketing, a lot of executive comms, in my most recent history. That sometimes I don't feel like a developer, but then when I get on a call like this and I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's my people.
Yeah.
And we get to talk about ourselves and how at the end of the day, I can stop coding for however many years and I'm still going to be a developer because our brains are like wired this way.
Mm-hmm.
And once we find it and once we start building, we are like never going to stop building. So, passion, I think, is like the word that comes to mind, of just like igniting that like developer passion and bringing all the beautiful stories and past into it.
No, that's great. I can't agree more. I think I even mentioned before we got started, like, I want to talk to people that are passionate about tech, and because those are the conversations that are interesting, right? Like, if you can
Yep.
talk for an hour and you look at the clock and you're like, oh, is it okay if we go 15 more minutes because I want to keep talking? Like, that means that you know, we're both in the same area of being super passionate about this thing that we've kind of, decided to live in, so to speak. Um,
Yep.
so that's the conversation. I would love to kind of get, if you have any takeaways for folks, like if you want to, a
Yeah.
parting word to our audience, what would it be?
Mm. Ooh, parting word. Okay, thinking about sort of your like end users being developers, likely. I assume that's most of your audience
Sure.
base, right?
Sure. Mostly,
I
mostly,
think my
mostly
parting
my parents. Like, that's about it, right?
I love that. I know when you were like, you said something about we've had a conversation for like over an hour and then like, oh, it's 15 minutes longer. I was like, yeah, that went so fast. But then I'm like, we may have enjoyed it, but do people want to listen to us rambling?
No. Yes,
Is
they
a
do.
whole nother
I
thing.
mean, someone does. Someone does.
That's true.
I look at
Yeah,
the, I
yeah.
look at the
Someone
numbers and
definitely
I'm like, really? Okay, sure. So,
Okay,
yeah,
people do,
yeah,
people do. I love it. Okay, so words for them then. Coming back around. The neurodiversity thing I think is I just want to tap into it because like there are plenty of developers that have nothing, that don't have any neurodiversities. They're perfectly normal and they probably feel like a minority because there are so many developers that have a neurodiversity, that I just want to like very blanketly say, you're beautiful if you have one and you're beautiful if you don't. If you do have one, find your coping methods,
hmm,
find your nerd herd, find your people, try things that can help you define things. Because if I can sort of share any extremely personal insights for myself, because that's kind of my MO, is like as I've been building this business for the past 6 months, it took me a while of like the evolution, right? Like,
yeah,
who do I want to serve? What do I want to serve? How do I want to serve? Right? What is this going to look like? How do I make money? Um, I had some like phases where I felt really dark. I felt really,
mm,
really, really depressed and really sad. And I was able to sort of like narrow down and it came to a like an unclear definition reasoning, right? Everything felt so overwhelming, so big. It was a big, huge decision that required so many different thoughts to get and make that big decision that it just felt so overwhelming.
sure,
And so I think like I know that necessarily like the neurodiversities wasn't the reason that we started talking, but I just because we talked on it so much that I
yeah,
think if that hits anyone in the feelers, like I just want them to like reach out. Honestly, like I have no issues like just having a conversation and sharing very openly my own struggles going through it. But also, I know a few people who have some really awesome newsletters going and some support groups that are getting started around developers who have neurodiversity specifically, and I'm excited to start to like announce and share some of those things as they come to fruition. So yeah, probably not the thing that I should have parted with. I probably should have said something
no,
cool about my business and
no, that's
how to
no,
hire me, but
no,
Tessa
no.
likes to help the hearts of my nerd herd.
No, I mean, look, if you're in the market for a service like the services you offer, like, I think that this entire show would basically be a pretty solid sales pitch. So I mean, I don't think you
That's
needed,
actually pretty valid.
I don't think you needed to kind of, sign me up at the end, but I think that, like, thank you
Yeah,
for the, the thing about ADHD and being neurodivergent and kind of looking for opportunities to understand a bit more, and also for empathy for people that might not have it and people that do have it, right? I think that's really, really important. I think that we definitely can do with some more empathy in this world. Um,
agree.
but, in general, like, it's been great to talk with you. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity to talk even a bit longer. And I'm looking forward to the next one where we do, we talk in the future about, like, hey, like, what has disrupted developer experience and how can we navigate that? Because that's always a fascinating conversation. So I want to thank you again
Can't
for your
wait for
time.
that.
And I want to thank you for the folks that are tuning
Yes, of
into
course.
this live and for the folks that are listening in the future. So, for my friend Tessa, my name is Isaac Levin, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.